I was a nationally ranked competitive cyclist going on the way to the Olympics. And then in January of 2016, I was hit by a car at 60 miles an hour. I died on the scene. My parents got the call that I was dead. And from that time, I was really passionate about bringing my message to the world about how important our time is.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Scale Smart, Grow Fast podcast. Today we've got a special guest, Nathan Barkocy, and he didn't build his business by chasing more. He built them by getting clearer on what only he should be doing. After rebuilding his life from a near fatal accident, Nathan went on to scale real estate and entrepreneurial ventures around his true wealth philosophy. In this episode, he's going to share what changed when he stopped being the execution hub and created real operational support and reclaimed the focus needed to scale income, purpose, and legacy without burning out. Nathan, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Harley, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be with you today.
Nathan, I'd love for you to share with our audience a little bit more about your background, especially that near fatal accident that was mentioned in the intro.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this brings us back 10 years ago where the story really begins. I was a nationally ranked competitive cyclist. I was state champion in New Mexico, youngest to ever win the Tour of the Gila, setting records, going on the way to the Olympics, to the Tour de France, and becoming an internationally renowned competitive cyclist. That was my vision, my goal. Right? And then in January of 2016, I was hit by a car at 60 miles an hour.
My goodness.
So I died on the scene, and the ambulance rushed me to the ICU. My parents got the call that I was dead and that the officer had reported it as a fatality. So, I mean, God bless my parents, right? They were driving to the hospital thinking I was dead. So I was in a coma for 2 weeks. And by God's grace, I opened my eyes for the first time 2 weeks later, paralyzed. So I couldn't move. And then I went on a medical flight up to Craig Hospital in Colorado, which is where they do traumatic brain injury rehab and spinal cord injury rehab. And that is where they rolled me into the hospital on a wheelchair. I don't remember being admitted to the hospital there, but my first memories start coming back during my recovery at that time. And that's where I learned how to live again. We learned how to walk again and function again, right? So that's where life really started for me. And from that time, I was really passionate about bringing my message to the world about how important our time is, because I thought as a teenage boy especially, I thought that I was going to live forever. And then within an instant, all of that can be stripped away from you so fast. And so that's why I really started to have a mental shift about the importance of our time, right? Because tomorrow is never promised. So I wanted to write a book. Since that day, I wanted to write a book about the importance of our time and what truly holds value in our life. Well, since that recovery, obviously, I went to college and I was able to graduate high school with my class, which is great, and I went through all of this, the different phases, and that same passion was still driving me to create my own time, right? To create time freedom and to live today as if it's our last day. Obviously, we need to plan for the future, right? But tomorrow is never promised, right? So we needed to take action today in order to make our dreams come true, which is a very entrepreneurial mindset, right? Which is how we get into the business side of things. I couldn't trade my time as an employee for other people. I've done that many times. And I was actually working with Josh McCallan up in New Jersey. He's the owner of Accountable Equity. And he fired me from when I was working with him because he told me I needed to go start my own business, right? And so that's where we get to today, right? Which is where I'm sure you and I will dive into where we are now, how I've been able to scale, how I've utilized Workergenics to help me do so. And so I'm very honored to be with you today and to be bringing this message to your audience.
Awesome. That was a great background, Nathan. I really appreciate you sharing that. Now, but before we jump into the specifics of the business, maybe kind of stepping back a little bit, a little more meta discussion. Now, before you really started creating the real leverage in your businesses, what would a typical week look like for you? And where were you still the bottleneck without maybe even realizing it?
Yeah, the question is, am I still the bottleneck? There's a lot of things that I've realized through working with you guys at Workergenics, right? And also during the scaling process of my business, because there's a difference between a solopreneur and a successful entrepreneur and a true capitalist, right? Who is able to create work for others, right? To create opportunities for others and leveraging their expertise, right? In their certain fields. You're able to scale so much faster and more effectively than having to do it all on your own. So if there was a time where I needed to realize this. It was about a year ago when we started. And it was when I realized that I didn't have time to do everything in order to have my businesses scale to the capacity that I needed them to. And so that's when I really started to put together the formulas of how to build a system. And that system is what's going to allow you to scale. You know this too, Harley, right? That's the only way to build your business effectively and efficiently is by creating those systems that are in place that others are able to execute and making it so easy for them to execute this, right? Not a lot of questions, just a lot of action to get it done, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Systems and people, excellent leverage there. So let's talk more about like what are your businesses that you're focusing on now and how did you create those systems in these businesses? I think a lot of people feel like their business is super unique and like making systems to get them out of being the bottleneck is just like impossible. So I'd love to hear your story with what you're doing now and kind of how you created some of those systems.
Yeah, it's a great question. In reality, just point blank honesty, my systems and my businesses were spreading me thin, right? So I was pursuing multiple real estate investments at the same time. I was pursuing multiple brands. I was writing my book. I was building my personal brands. All of this stuff scaling, right? I'm also a father of two little boys and a husband of beautiful brides. I was running my family, running the businesses, running multiple developments, running investments, all of these different things at the same time. And that's how I've been able to scale more effectively by bringing more people onto the team. So the particular business that I would like to focus on in answer to your question is my real estate restoration business, because that is a service-based business that I have multiple employees for, and we are scaling very rapidly. We're bringing in a lot of clients. So I'll take you through that process because I think that's the most important business right now for the money, of course. My passion is my personal brand, and I'm obviously very successful in that regard because I'm able to bring that message to our audience, and our book is an international bestseller. But I think for the business systems in place, the most effective story I'm able to provide to you is this restoration business. So we started with a team of two and a very successful, accomplished team. And it's a general contractor who has 40 plus years of experience, and then an insurance adjuster who he used to be an insurance adjuster, but now what he does is he knows how to leverage our clients' insurance policies so that we can best serve them and hold a fiduciary mindset for our clients. And it's really interesting because we're a restoration business, which we service properties across the Dallas-Fort Worth DFW Metroplex. And so we work with roofs that have hail damage. We work with blown piping, right? Burst pipes when it freezes, structural damage, leaks, right? So any sort of general contracting real estate restoration service that needs to be provided. And so with the team of the three of us, we were able to bring in quite a few contracts, but it wasn't on a consistent basis in a scalable manner. Then I realized I needed to build the systems, right? So we started to bring on other people to the team, working with specific marketing plans to develop faster. I've learned a lot through my experiences, a lot of loss too, because I dumped a lot of ad spend into Google Ads, and you can't compete with the big dogs out here in DFW, right? As a small business, because they're pumping their Google ad spend so heavy every single day. That's something you can't compete with. So therefore, you have to start creating organic leads, and I mean that's a whole podcast in itself, right there. So I think it's really interesting because you need to be able to scale your systems, but also know how to scale them effectively for your current situation, right? Because there's a way for a large corporate restoration company to scale, and then there's a way for a small, locally owned restoration company to scale, right? They're two very different things. There's two very different ad spends involved, two very different, employee base that's required. So I think it's a very interesting and unique opportunity that I've had to be able to go through the pains of growth, growing pains, of course, and also be able to scale effectively so that we can have the fiduciary mindset for all of our clients.
Now, let's talk about that kind of structured support when you first started handing off responsibilities. What were some of the first responsibilities that you let go of, and what were maybe some of the surprises or challenges that came up as you were starting to delegate more?
Yeah. So when I started delegating, it was like I told you, I was very spread thin. So I started delegating as much as I could. But that's hard to wrap your mind around if you're not in my mind, you know? So if I have a restoration business, a development across the street from my townhome portfolio, also the management of my townhome portfolio, also the management of another restoration in a different state, also the operation of my personal brand, also the operation and development of my book. That's a lot of different things going on, you know? That was probably my biggest growing pain for when I first engaged with a virtual assistant, right, with the scaling, because I wanted to delegate everything. But I had to realize that I can't delegate everything because then I'm going to start getting mismatched and our team isn't going to be properly executing everything that we need to. So that was something really big that I learned. Really, in the beginning, I started delegating most of my personal brand content to our employees here at Workogenics. And so that's been incredible because my time is obviously, I'm the creator of my content. So I wouldn't want to spend my time uploading that content to social media, creating the social media posts, editing the posts, making that all attractive for my audience. That is obviously something that my assistant is able to do perfectly. She has such an accomplished portfolio of social media posts and of platforms that she's built. And so that's why I've learned what to delegate and why I need to delegate them. And then we've been able to scale, very efficiently in that manner because I'm not throwing everything at my VA now, all right? I'm working with my VA on specific tasks that need to be done, and then I'll handle the rest, right?
If you're running a growing company and still handling too many operational details yourself, there's a better way forward. The Delegate or Die checklist shows you the exact tasks that drain leadership bandwidth and the simple changes that recover 15 to 30 plus hours a week. Download it free at workogenics.com/scale-smart. Now let's get back to the episode. What were some of the results, maybe like with you personally, when you did, get to that point where you had this responsibility, you had it handed off, and so that was no longer on your plate? What was the effect for you and your businesses? Did you just like take on more, or were you able to start working on things that were like nice to have that hadn't had before, or just get some mental and time breathing space? What did that look like for you?
I would say I would take on more, but as you know, Harley, right? The life of an entrepreneur, you're working 24/7. So it's almost impossible to take on more, but it's not taking on more in quantity, it's taking on more in quality, right? Since I was able to engage with my VA, right, I've been able to effectively have larger, deeper, more effective conversations with investors, with partners, with teams, and I've been able to effectively have more of an impact in the conversations that I'm having, in the sales that I'm closing, in the opportunities that I'm developing, as opposed to having to focus on the minute details while I'm also having those conversations, right?
Yeah. Well, that's huge. I think a lot of people, when they are new, maybe they're worried about the investment in bringing on an EA, they might worry about what's the ROI going to be. And it sounds like there's just a lot more than just like that task that came off your plate. You're no longer doing this $11 an hour, $12 an hour task. There's just all these other opportunities that come and just kind of expand beyond that original amount of time that maybe you would have been spent doing those tasks. Can you share maybe some other examples of like the change in how you approach things, like your leadership workflow after having that experience of delegating successfully and seeing these results? Has that kind of changed how you maybe approach other areas in the business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the delegation is important because, like I was really focusing on, right, is the effectiveness of your time, right? So the whole mission behind True Wealth is to help people understand the value of their time. Well, the value of their time is number one, but the type of attention that they're giving to certain tasks with that time is number two, right? So they need to be able to effectively utilize their time to create the necessary attention to the tasks that will move them forward. I've obviously had my time consumed in my life with a lot of ineffective time wasters, if you want to say that. And so when you're able to start delegating these tasks to a VA, then you're understanding really you have to make the decision, what am I most effective with my time, right? And how can I utilize that effectiveness of my time to create more, a more expansion, right? And so, and the trick too is a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is long term, right? So it takes a long time to build a personal brand, right? It takes a long time to establish credibility, especially at a young age of mine, right? And so that's why it's been interesting to work with a VA to allow me to continue to leverage my time to really lean into the scaling and the systems that need to be in place in order to effectively, build that brand, build the businesses, and take all of the necessary steps.
So I wanted to touch on that. How do you ensure that the systems support your purpose and the legacy that you're building and not just revenue growth?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. That's your true wealth question right there, right? So the book, right, my book, Old Wealth, New Wealth, True Wealth, it discusses the new currency, right? And it goes beyond dollars. It's a new currency of legacy. And this is a really interesting concept because a lot of people don't think about legacy on the day to day, right? How are they building their legacy? What will outlast them? Will the wealth that they're generating for themselves or their family, will it live beyond them? And without a system in place, Harley, you can't build that legacy, right? It's so necessary to have systems in place and to be able to delegate all of those tasks to teams in order to continue your legacy. A prime example would be the family office, right? This has been seen in families like the Rockefellers, right? Where there's such an abundance of wealth. And instead of having that just be blown in 2 generations, right? Instead of having just 2 generations blow through the billions of dollars of monetary wealth, as we've seen in several of the other large families, right? You can see the effectiveness and the carrying of that wealth if there are systems in place like a family office, right? Like whole life insurance, like these systems where the family is able to accomplish, multi-generational scaling processes in order to maintain that familial legacy.
So, for the founders out there and other entrepreneurs that are listening, and maybe they're feeling really busy, maybe a little bit misaligned, kind of just like you mentioned this earlier, how oftentimes you don't even know necessarily kind of what you're best at in your business until you start delegating because you're just having to do everything. What's one action that you'd tell them to take this week to start creating real leverage and clarity?
This is a great question too, and I think pivotal for any entrepreneur. Keep track of your time, right? So write a time log. And I think you guys may even do this with Workergenics, right? But write a time log. So on your day to day this week, record what you're doing with each minute of your time. And then think, is that time that I have spent most effective, right? We all need a little bit of a break here and there. So yeah, we need to eat some lunch or, grab some coffee. And those are effective breaks in our time. But are you leveraging your time to the fullest capacity in order to scale your effectiveness? Or are you wasting your time? And maybe you're busy, right? Maybe you're busy because you're putting together social media posts or you're editing your videos that you've recorded or whatever the case may be. But is that the most effective use of your time? Is your time more valuable when you're creating the content as opposed to editing the content, right? And so this is something that's really important that we all need to understand in order to really regain ownership of our time. We need to understand how we can own our time, right? And what we are doing with our current time, because the same 24 hours in a day doesn't change, but it's about how we're using that time.
So that's an excellent answer. Nathan, thank you so much for sharing your insights. And if those that are listening want to connect with you, where's the best place for someone to connect with you if they want to explore more about the True Wealth philosophy and how you're applying it in real businesses?
Absolutely. Anyone can find my book, Old Wealth, New Wealth, True Wealth, which is co-authored by Sharon Lechter, who's the co-author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. They can find that book at my website, truewealthbook.com. And then if anyone is interested in learning more about how to grow their business, how to scale their business, how to start their business, I have started what's called the True Wealth Community, which is it's a community that's really based upon accountability, and it's with like-minded entrepreneurs, right, who all have the same vision. I host accountability calls once a week to keep everyone accountable for the actions that need to be taken to scale their business, to be the person that they are called to be in order to become the business owner they desire to be. And then there's going to be a lot of content on this platform with high profile thought leaders, investors, and business owners that are giving their insight to how they've been able to scale and build their brands. And then at the end of each session that we're doing with those thought leaders, I'll be giving a referral link so that my clients are able to make a decision if they want to move forward with the guidance of another mentor who has mentored me, right? So true wealth is very communal. And so what I'm building in this true wealth community is the fact that we can all become abundant by working together and by collaborating. So people are gaining access to the organic, evergreen true wealth content by becoming part of the true wealth community. And then those that decide to keep going even further and surrounding themselves with like-minded individuals, like-minded entrepreneurs, they will join the True Wealth weekly calls in our community. And that's how they'll be able to scale their businesses, start their businesses, do their first real estate investment. So I can walk them through all of that stuff. So that is all found on nathanbarkocy.com. That's Nathan, Barkocy.com.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to include the link in the show notes for anyone that wants to check that out. It sounds like you're going to be providing a huge amount of value there to people. Thank you for coming on the podcast today. And to those of you who are listening, if you got value today, hit follow or subscribe and tap that star or like button. Every rating helps us equip more business leaders who want to grow the smart way. Thank you all for tuning in to Scale Smart, Grow Fast. Here's to building businesses that give you more freedom, stronger teams, and lasting growth. Until next time, keep scaling smart.